On May 29, 1453, the ancient city of Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood as the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman world. Its walls had resisted armies for centuries. Its churches, markets, libraries, and palaces made it one of the great cities of the medieval world. But by the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was only a shadow of its former power. The Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mehmed II, was rising rapidly. Mehmed was young, ambitious, and determined to take the city that many before him had failed to conquer. The siege lasted nearly 2 months. The Ottomans used powerful cannons, including massive artillery pieces that battered the ancient walls. The defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, fought desperately, but they were vastly outnumbered. When Constantinople finally fell, it was more than the death of a city. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the final disappearance of the Roman state that had survived in the East for over a millennium. The consequences were enormous. The Ottoman Empire became a major power connecting Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became the heart of a vast Islamic empire. Trade routes between Europe and Asia came increasingly under Ottoman control, encouraging European powers to search for new sea routes to the east. This search helped launch the Age of Exploration. Within decades, Portuguese sailors rounded Africa, and Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492. The fall of Constantinople also sent Greek scholars fleeing westward, carrying manuscripts and classical knowledge that helped nourish the Renaissance in Europe. A city had fallen, but from its ruins, the modern world began to take shape. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west across the Atlantic under the sponsorship of Spain. He believed he could reach Asia by sailing westward. Instead, he reached islands in the Caribbean. To Europeans, this voyage opened the door to what they called the New World. To the indigenous peoples of the Americas, it marked the beginning of conquest, disease, displacement, and profound cultural destruction. The importance of Columbus's voyage does not lie in the idea that he discovered America. Millions of people already lived there, with complex societies, cities, trade networks, religions, and political systems. Nor was Columbus the first outsider to reach the Americas. Norse explorers had arrived in North America centuries earlier. But Columbus's 1492 voyage began sustained contact between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. This changed the planet. The Columbian Exchange transformed global life. Crops such as potatoes, maize, tomatoes, cacao, and tobacco moved from the Americas to the rest of the world. Horses, cattle, wheat, sugarcane, and many diseases moved from the Old World to the Americas. The potato helped feed growing populations in Europe and Asia. Maize became a major crop in Africa and China. Sugar plantations expanded across the Caribbean and Brazil, creating enormous wealth for European empires, but also fueling the brutal transatlantic slave trade. European colonization devastated indigenous populations, especially through diseases such as smallpox, to which many native communities had no immunity. Empires such as the Aztec and Inca were conquered by Spanish forces in the 16th century. The Atlantic world was born, a world of trade, conquest, slavery, migration, and empire. The consequences are still visible today in languages, religions, borders, economies, and racial identities across the Americas. Columbus did not understand the world he had entered, but after 1492, the histories of continents became permanently connected. For most of human history, life was powered by muscle, wind, water, and animal labor. Most people lived in rural communities. Work followed the rhythm of seasons. Production was slow, local, and limited. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Beginning in Britain in the late 18th century, New machines, factories, and sources of power transformed how goods were made and how people lived. The steam engine became one of the great symbols of the age. Textile mills, coal mines, ironworks, railways, and later steel production changed the structure of society. This was not a single event on one day. It was a long transformation. But few changes in human history have been more important. Factories pulled workers from villages into rapidly growing cities. Railways shrank distances. Steamships connected continents. Mass production made goods cheaper and more available. Industrial technology increased productivity on a scale never seen before. But the revolution had a dark side. Factory workers often endured long hours, dangerous conditions, and low wages. Child labor was common in many industrial centers. Cities grew faster than housing, sanitation, and public health systems could manage. Smoke and pollution filled industrial landscapes. The Industrial Revolution also gave European powers greater military and economic strength, helping them expand imperial control over large parts of Africa and Asia in the 19th century. At the same time, industrialization created new political movements. Workers began organizing for rights. Socialism, trade unionism, modern capitalism, and new ideas about class conflict all emerged in response to the industrial age. The modern world, with its cities, factories, railways, consumer goods, fossil fuel dependence, and global markets, was born in this period. Before the Industrial Revolution, change was often slow. After it, humanity entered an age of acceleration. In the summer of 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary triggered a crisis in Europe. Within weeks, alliances, rivalries, imperial ambitions, and military plans pulled the continent into war. World War I was unlike anything humanity had seen before. Millions of soldiers were sent to the front. Machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas, tanks, aircraft, and submarines turned battlefields into industrial killing grounds. On the Western Front, armies dug into trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Men lived in mud, fear, and exhaustion, often fighting for months over small pieces of land. The war destroyed empires. By 1918, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires had collapsed or been transformed. The Russian Revolution of 1917 led to the rise of the Soviet state, which would shape global politics for much of the 20th century. The map of Europe and the Middle East was redrawn. New states emerged. Old communities were divided by new borders. The Ottoman Empire's defeat helped create the modern Middle East under British and French influence, with consequences that remain deeply important today. The Treaty of Versailles punished Germany and created resentment that Adolf Hitler and the Nazi movement later exploited. While historians debate the extent to which Versailles directly caused World War II, there is broad agreement that the unresolved tensions after World War I helped destabilize Europe. World War I also changed society. Women entered wartime industries in large numbers, strengthening demands for political rights in several countries. Soldiers returned traumatized. Faith in progress, empire, and old aristocratic orders was badly shaken. The war ended on November 11, 1918. But in many ways, it did not truly end. Its consequences echoed into World War II, the Cold War, the Middle East, and the modern international order. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was almost beyond imagination. In Hiroshima, much of the city was destroyed instantly. Tens of thousands died immediately, and many more died later from burns, injuries, and radiation-related illness. Nagasaki suffered terrible devastation as well. Japan announced its surrender shortly afterward, and World War II formally ended in September 1945. The bombings remain among the most debated events in modern history. Some argue they hastened the end of the war and avoided a costly invasion of Japan. Others argue Japan was already near defeat and that the use of nuclear weapons was unnecessary or morally indefensible. Historians continue to debate the military, political, and ethical dimensions of the decision. But one fact is beyond dispute. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, humanity entered the nuclear age. For the first time, human beings possessed weapons capable of destroying entire cities in a single strike. Soon, the United States and the Soviet Union entered a nuclear arms race. The Cold War was shaped by the terrifying possibility of global annihilation. The bomb also transformed science, diplomacy, ethics, and public fear. Nuclear energy promised new forms of power, while nuclear weapons threatened human survival. Since 1945, nuclear weapons have not been used again in war, but their existence continues to define global security. And that's it for today's episode. Which historical event impressed you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more exciting content. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.